Sebastian Croft stepped out of his black Range Rover and rolled his shoulders back, the way he always did before walking into a room he didn't want to be in. He looked composed, the way men who'd lost everything and rebuilt it twice overlearned to look composed, but underneath the gray wool coat there was a tightness in his chest that money had never been able to fix. He had practiced this face in the mirror that morning, calm, unbothered, a man who simply happened to be attending a gala, nothing more. The photographers near the entrance of the Whitlock Astor Hotel called out anyway. "Sebastian, any comment on tonight?" "Mr. Croft, did you know Renata would be hosting?" He didn't answer. He never answered. He just looked past the velvet ropes toward the gold-trimmed doors, where, in a few hours, his ex-fiancée would stand on a stage and announce the launch of the foundation she'd built with the man she left him for, Renata Pierce. He still couldn't say her name without feeling something twist low in his stomach, though it wasn't love anymore. It hadn't been love for a long time. It was the particular ache of being discarded by someone who once swore she'd stay through anything. 2 years ago, Sebastian's company had nearly collapsed in a single financial quarter, a supplier fraud scandal he hadn't caused but had to answer for anyway. The board panicked. The press feasted. And Renata, sitting across from him in their kitchen with her tea going cold, had said the words he still heard sometimes at 3 in the morning. "I can't watch you lose everything, Sebastian. I need a life that's stable." Then she'd taken off the ring and set it on the table like she was returning a library book. She married Holt Ferrante 4 months later. Holt, who'd once tried to poach half of Sebastian's senior engineers, who smiled like a man auditioning for a toothpaste commercial, who had never built a single thing himself but was excellent at attaching his name to things other people had built. Tonight the two of them were unveiling something called the Pierce Ferrante Legacy Foundation, and half the city's money had shown up to watch. Sebastian hadn't come for Renata. He told himself that on the drive over, and he told himself that again now, standing under the chandeliers spilling gold light onto the marble steps. He'd come because not coming would have looked like hiding, and he didn't hide. Not anymore. He had rebuilt his company from the studs up, quietly, methodically, until the same people who'd once crossed the street to avoid him were now sending him holiday cards. He wanted Renata to see that. He wanted, if he was honest with himself, one small unkind thing, for her to look at him and feel even a flicker of regret. That was when he saw her. Across the street, past the line of valets and the soft hiss of car doors, a woman sat against the brick wall of the parking garage, knees pulled up, a flattened cardboard box beneath her for warmth. Her coat, what could be called a coat, was thin and gray, the kind that had probably been someone else's first. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands stuck to her cheek. She wasn't holding a sign. She wasn't asking anyone for anything. She just sat there, very still, watching the gala lights with an expression that wasn't envy and wasn't sorrow. It looked, Sebastian thought, almost like she was cataloging the room, like a scientist observing something from a great distance. People stepped around her without looking. A woman in a feathered shawl actually lifted the hem of her dress slightly as she passed, as if proximity itself might stain it. A security guard from the hotel crossed the street toward her, jacket buttoned, posture official. "Ma'am, you can't be here. We've got VIPs arriving." The woman looked up at him, calm. "I'm not blocking the entrance. You're making the block look bad. Move it along." Sebastian felt his jaw tighten before he understood why. He knew that tone. He'd heard it in boardrooms dressed up in nicer language. "We think it's best if you step back for now." But it meant the same thing every time. Someone had decided a person was inconvenient, and inconvenient people got erased. The guard reached for her arm. Sebastian was already crossing the street. "Don't touch her." The guard froze. Hand still half extended. Something in Sebastian's voice doing the work that volume usually had to do. The woman looked up, startled, and for a second their eyes met. Hers were dark, tired and unflinchingly steady, the kind of eyes that had learned not to look away from anything anymore. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her. Chapped lips, hollows under her eyes, the particular thinness of someone who'd been rationing meals. But there was a stillness to her too, a posture that refused to apologize for existing. Just beneath her left eye, faint and easy to miss, was a small crescent-shaped scar. "Have you eaten today?" he asked, quieter than he meant to. She blinked, like kindness from a man in a $4,000 coat was a language she didn't recognize. "I'm okay." He didn't believe her, but he let it go. "What's your name?" A pause. Calculating something, whether it was safe to answer maybe. "Ren, Ren," he repeated. It suited her somehow, small and watchful. "Come with me," he said. She studied him like he'd spoken in a different language. "Excuse me?" To the gala. For the first time, something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. "You're not serious." "I'm rarely anything else." She looked down at herself, the thin coat, the worn boots. "I look like this." He glanced back at the hotel doors, where women in sequined gowns were being handed out of town cars, then back at her. "You look like someone this city has badly underestimated." Something in her face shifted, like the words had landed somewhere she hadn't expected to be touched. She wanted to refuse him. He could see the refusal forming. But there was a hunger underneath it too, something that needed the offer more than she wanted to admit. He shrugged out of his coat and settled it over her shoulders. It was warm in a way that had nothing to do with wool, and she pulled the collar closer, like she was afraid it might be taken back if she didn't hold on tightly enough. For a moment her eyes closed, just a flicker, like she was memorizing the feeling. He offered his arm. "Shall we?" "They'll stare. Let them. Why are you doing this?" Her voice wasn't suspicious exactly. It was just tired of people who did things for reasons that turned out to be selfish later. Because no one should be freezing on concrete while a room full of people in $5,000 dresses pretends not to notice, he said. It wasn't elegant. It was just true. And something about the plainness of it made her decide to trust him. Just slightly, just enough. She took his arm. The ballroom of the Whitlock Astor was the kind of beautiful that announced itself. Crystal chandeliers, the size of small cars, white peonies stacked in towers on every table, a string quartet playing something that sounded expensive even if you didn't know the composer. The room quieted when Sebastian walked in. Everyone in that city knew his name, knew the story of his fall and his furious, elegant return, but the silence didn't stay on him for long. Within seconds, every eye had slid to Ren. She was still in her thin coat. His coat now, technically, hair coming loose at the temples, face pale under the chandelier light that made everything else in the room glitter. She didn't shrink. She held Sebastian's arm and kept her spine straight even as the whispers started, low and immediate. Did he bring someone off the street? Is that his coat? What on earth is this? Ren heard every word. He felt her fingers tighten against his sleeve. He leaned down slightly. Don't look at the floor. They're laughing at me, she murmured. No, he said. They're showing you exactly who they are. She exhaled hard, but her chin stayed up. He led her to a table near the front, sat her down like she belonged there, because as far as he was concerned, she did. An older woman at the next table, silver hair, a brooch the size of a fist, looked Ren up and down with open distaste. Sebastian, she said coolly, what exactly is this? He didn't answer her either. The string quartet shifted into something slower. Across the room, near the small stage decorated in white and gold, Renata stood beside Holt, resplendent in champagne silk, practicing her smile for the cameras. When she spotted Sebastian, something crossed her face. Surprise, maybe a flicker of something older. Then she saw the woman beside him, and her expression sharpened into something colder. The program began. Holt took the microphone first, thanking donors, thanking his extraordinary partner in life and philanthropy, gesturing for Renata to join him at the podium. Sebastian sat very still through it, but every practiced word seemed to land somewhere old in his chest. From the day I met her, Holt was saying, I knew Renata deserved a partner who could give her a life without limits. Sebastian's hand tightened slightly on his knee. Ren noticed. She leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. Did she hurt you badly? He didn't know why he told her the truth. Yes, she considered that for a moment. Then don't let her see it. That's the only kind of winning that's worth anything. Something in him loosened, just slightly. He'd brought her here half thinking she'd be a prop, a small private rebellion. Instead, this woman, cold, hungry, abandoned by the world that night, was the one steadying him. After the speeches, the room dissolved into mingling, but the stares never fully left Ren. A man 2 tables over made a comment about Sebastian's interesting choice of company, loud enough to carry. Wren's eyes dropped to the tablecloth. Look at me, Sebastian said. She did. You don't owe them shame. You talk like you know what shame feels like. I do, he said. Mine just came in a better suit. That earned the smallest smile, and something in him filed it away, like it mattered more than it should have. Renata approached a few minutes later, gliding the way she always glided, like the floor had been informed in advance to behave for her. Sebastian, she said, with a smile arranged for an audience, I confess I'm surprised you came. You sent the invitation. I did. I suppose I assumed you'd decline. I almost did. Her eyes moved to Wren, slow and assessing. And you brought a friend. How sweet. What's your name, dear? Wren. Just Wren. Sebastian's face changed, something hardening behind his eyes. That's enough, Renata. She laughed lightly, the sound polished and empty. Goodness, I was only being friendly. No, he said. You're being cruel and calling it manners. The conversation around them dimmed. Renata's smile held, but it stopped reaching her eyes. She's got quite a lot of nerve, considering how she arrived. Wren looked up then, voice quiet but unwavering. And you've got quite a lot of emptiness for someone who has everything. Renata went very still. Sebastian looked at Wren and, for the first time all night, forgot entirely why he'd come. This woman had nothing the world recognized as valuable, and yet she carried herself with more grace than anyone wearing a 5-figure gown in that ballroom. Do you have any idea who I am? Renata asked, voice cooling further. Yes, Wren said simply. You're the woman who left a good man the moment things got hard. The silence around them deepened. Holt appeared at Renata's elbow, murmuring something about decorum, but Renata wasn't listening anymore. Sebastian rose slowly. I brought her here because I wanted to make you uncomfortable, he said to Renata, voice even. I thought that's what I wanted. I was wrong. I brought her because I saw a woman outside being treated like she didn't matter, and in 2 hours, she's shown more dignity than this entire room. He turned to Wren, his voice softening. I know what it feels like to be left when things fall apart, Renata. You taught me that. But I won't let this room teach her the same lesson. Renata opened her mouth. Nothing came out. It was then that an older man approached, white-haired, leaning slightly on a cane he didn't seem to need, a glass of champagne in his free hand. Sebastian recognized him instantly. Walter Ainsley, one of the few men in the city whose judgment he actually trusted, a mentor from his earliest years in business. Long before that, Walter had advised some of the oldest families in the state, including the Calderwoods, whose name had quietly vanished from the social registry after a house fire 11 years back. Sebastian, Walter said warmly, extending a hand. I didn't expect to see you here tonight. Neither did I, sir. Walter's eyes crinkled. Life has a habit of pulling us back into rooms we thought we'd closed the door on. He almost smiled at his own joke. Then his gaze drifted to Wren, and the smile died on his face. He lowered his glass slowly. His eyes moved over her, the shape of her jaw, the tired darkness of her eyes, and then, finally, the small crescent scar beneath her left eye. Something in him seemed to travel a great distance in an instant. Back to smoke, back to a name he hadn't said aloud in over a decade. Sir, Sebastian said, are you all right? Walter didn't answer right away. He looked almost afraid to breathe. Wren pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. Is something wrong? Forgive me, Walter said finally, voice thin. I didn't mean to stare. He took a step closer, and Sebastian instinctively moved closer to Wren, protective without deciding to be. What's your name, child? Wren. Wren what? Sebastian's eyes narrowed. Why does it matter? Walter's hand trembled around the stem of his glass. Please, I need to know. Wren looked between the two men, something about Walter's expression unsettling her. Not dangerous, just wounded, like a man confronting a memory that had clawed its way back. My name is Wren Calderwood, she said quietly. The glass nearly slipped from Walter's fingers. Calderwood, he whispered. The room around them seemed to lean in, sensing something had shifted. Wren's heart was pounding now. Do you know my family? Tears were already gathering in Walter's eyes. Where are you from? I don't really know anymore. My mother died when I was very young. There was a fire, and after that I was moved around until no one bothered to ask where I'd come from. Walter pressed a trembling hand to his mouth. The fire, he murmured. Sebastian turned sharply. What fire? The Calderwood fire. Walter said, barely able to get the words out. 11 years ago. Wren felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. How do you know about that? He looked at her again, and this time he let the tears fall. Because I knew your mother. You are her, Wren. The same eyes. The same face. She had a small mark in nearly the same place. From a childhood fall she used to laugh about. Wren shook her head. No, yes. His voice was gentle now, urgent. We searched for you for years. After the fire, everyone believed you'd died too. Sebastian's hand found the small of her back, steady. What are you saying, Walter? Walter looked at Wren with an expression that held grief and wonder in equal measure. I'm saying we have been looking for you for 11 years. Why? Wren's voice cracked. Because your mother was the last Calderwood heir. Before she died, she set aside a trust in your name, meant to protect you, to give you a life, no matter what happened to her. When you disappeared, that money sat untouched, waiting. You were never forgotten, Wren. You were only lost until the right moment found you. For the first time that evening, no one in the room was laughing. No one whispered like she was beneath them. They simply watched, the truth settling over the gathering like snowfall. Wren turned to Sebastian, eyes shining. You knew nothing about this. Nothing, he said softly. Then why did you help me? He held her gaze, and there was no performance left in his face. Because you still had your dignity after everything the world did to take it from you, and I thought that was worth protecting. She cried then, not loudly, but with the particular ache of someone who'd had to be strong for far too long, finally allowed to set it down. Sebastian stayed beside her, hands steady against her back, while across the room, Renata watched the man she'd discarded become a shelter for someone she'd never have thought to notice. Walter looked around the ballroom, taking in the same faces that had sneered at Wren an hour earlier, now staring at her in stunned silence. Something like shame crossed his face. He'd known her mother, had respected her, had watched her give everything to people who needed it. And here was her daughter, standing in a thin coat while people laughed behind champagne glasses. He turned to Sebastian. She shouldn't go back into that room like this. Wren looked confused. What do you mean? Walter's eyes softened. I mean, your mother deserved to see her daughter honored. If she can't be here to do it herself, then let an old man who failed to find her sooner do it in her place. Sebastian looked at Wren. You don't have to agree to this. She wiped her eyes. I don't want to be put on display. You won't be, he said gently. But you also don't have to let this room remember you only like this. Within the hour, Sebastian stepped quietly into the hallway and made a single phone call. He didn't announce it, didn't explain himself to anyone still gathered near the bar. He simply spoke in a low, certain voice to a woman who ran the city's most exclusive atelier, a woman who owed him several favors and told her precisely what he needed. Emerald, he said without hesitating. Something unforgettable, fitted through the bodice, with hand-set stones and a train that moves when she walks. He paid for all of it himself. He didn't tell Wren. He simply arranged it the way a person quietly brings an umbrella to someone before the storm arrives. Less than an hour later, a stylist appeared with a garment bag, a small velvet case, and gentle, unhurried hands. Inside was an emerald gown, floor-length, fitted to the waist, scattered with hand-set stones that caught the light in slow, deliberate flashes. The train pooled and shifted like water when she moved. When the zipper was fastened, the dress didn't just fit her, it revealed her. Wren stood in front of the mirror, speechless. For a moment she didn't recognize the woman looking back. The emerald silk skimmed her frame, the stones catching the chandelier light through the open dressing room door. Her loose waves framed around a face that finally looked rested. Almost. She touched the small scar beneath her eye and whispered, Is that really me? Sebastian, standing in the doorway, smiled softly. Yes, that's who you've always been. She thought suddenly of her mother, a woman she barely remembered, except now, somehow she did, just slightly, the way you remember a song you didn't know you'd memorized. She picked up the garment tag still pinned to the sleeve and saw Sebastian's name written beside the purchase note. She held it a moment, then set it down, smoothed the front of the gown, and walked toward the ballroom doors. This time, when the doors opened, no one whispered. Wren walked in wearing the emerald gown, the train trailing softly behind her, her steps unhurried, her chin lifted just enough to mean it. The chandelier light caught every stone and scattered it gently across the room, and for a moment the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. But it wasn't the dress that silenced the room. It was the way she carried herself. She had walked in earlier as a woman they'd mocked. Now she returned as a woman they wished they'd respected from the start. Sebastian stood the moment he saw her. For a few seconds he forgot where he was, forgot Renata, forgot Holt, forgot the entire reason he'd come that night. All he saw was Ren. She crossed the room toward him, nervous beneath the beauty of it all, and he moved to meet her before the room could swallow her whole again. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Her eyes filled. "It's too much." "No," he said, taking her hand. "For the first time tonight, they're finally seeing you." Walter was invited to speak before dinner resumed. The room went quiet the moment he rose, because everyone there knew he wasn't a man who wasted words. He held the microphone, but for a long moment only looked at Ren. "I came here tonight prepared to give a polite toast," he began. "Life has handed me something far more important to say instead." The room stilled completely. He turned fully toward her. "Years ago, I knew a woman from the Calderwood family. She was generous, sharp-minded, and braver than most people I've ever known. When a fire destroyed her home, her daughter was believed lost. For 11 years, we searched. We hoped. Eventually, most of us grieved what we thought we'd never find." Ren's hand trembled in Sebastian's. "But tonight," Walter continued, voice thickening, "I looked across this room and saw her face again, the same eyes, the same steadiness, the same small scar beneath her left eye. Standing here tonight is Ren Calderwood, the daughter the fire didn't take after all." A wave of gasps moved through the crowd. Renata's face had gone the color of the tablecloths. Walter looked around the room, sorrow plain in his face. "And I am ashamed that some of you looked at her coat before you looked at her character. You mocked a woman whose mother carried more honor in her than half the people in this room have ever managed." He lifted his glass. "To Ren Calderwood, not because of what she's inherited, but because even when the world forgot her, she never forgot who she was." For a moment nobody moved. Then Sebastian began to clap. One by one, the room rose to its feet, applause filling the hall, some simply ashamed. Ren could barely hear any of it. She only felt Sebastian's hand around hers, steady and warm. When she turned to him, tears slipping down her cheeks, he pulled her gently against him. "You're safe," he murmured. And then, in front of the room that had mocked her only hours earlier, he kissed her. It wasn't for show, and it wasn't to wound Renata. It was quiet and protective and full of something Sebastian hadn't expected to feel that night. Renata stood frozen at the edge of the room, watching the man she'd once thrown away hold someone else, like she was the only good thing left in the world. She watched him pull out Ren's chair, keep a hand at her waist whenever people drifted too close, lean in to listen when she spoke, look at her like she was the only person in the building. For the rest of the evening, Sebastian stayed close. When Ren looked overwhelmed by the attention, he leaned down and spoke softly until her shoulders relaxed. When people approached with curious, calculating smiles, he answered for her until she felt steady enough to answer for herself. When the music shifted to something slower, he offered his hand and led her to the floor. She hesitated. "Everyone's watching. Let them. I don't know how to dance in a dress like this. Then we'll go slow." And they did. Under the chandeliers of the Whitlock Astor, Sebastian held her like something the world had nearly broken, and he had no intention of letting break further. Ren rested her head against his shoulder and, for the first time in longer than she could remember, let herself breathe all the way out. Across the room, Renata watched, and for the first time that night, the diamonds at her throat felt cold against her skin. That night, Sebastian brought Ren to his estate outside the city, the emerald gown still catching the porch lights as they walked in. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she said quietly. "Then don't be," he said, and meant it. They sat by the fire until the small hours, and she told him about the years she didn't talk about. The shelters, the buses she'd slept on, the nights she used to imagine someone, somewhere, was still looking for her, even when she'd stopped believing it. He told her about the year his company nearly collapsed, the year Renata left, the long, quiet stretch of rebuilding something out of almost nothing. Somewhere near dawn, she fell asleep against his shoulder, and he sat very still so as not to wake her, like he'd finally found something worth being careful with. Months later, he proposed in the garden behind his estate. No cameras, no audience, nothing performative left between them. Just two people who'd both been left out in the cold once and had decided, together, to stop letting that define them. Their wedding was small, held under a string of lights in that same garden, surrounded only by the people who actually mattered. Years after that, the house was loud with the sound of children, and the particular, ordinary happiness neither of them had ever quite believed they'd get to have. Renata became a name that occasionally surfaced at parties and meant nothing anymore. Holt became a cautionary tale people told over drinks, and Sebastian and Ren became proof of something simpler than either of them had expected. That the right kind of love doesn't rescue your dignity, it recognizes it, and once it does, it never lets go.